Welcome to our study of the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. In this lesson, we want to consider some of the characteristics of David that validate God's claim about the king being a man after his own heart. When most people talk about the greatness of David, they turn first to David's victory over that giant of a man, Goliath, and for good reason. It is truly a wonderful display of faith and confidence in the Lord. When young David tells King Saul about killing lions and bears to defend his flock, David lifts up God and not himself. He says in 1 Samuel 17:34-38, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." David trusted God to deliver him from these vicious animals, and he trusts him now to deliver him from this Philistine giant. He knows that God is reliable and able to be trusted. We need to recognize that it is not just David's amazing triumphs in battle that establish his qualification as a man after God's own heart. More importantly, it is his moments of quiet trust in the Lord that give him such a title. We see time and time again David leaning on God no matter what is going on around him. He often holds back the human instinct to make quick and usually damaging decisions. This is a character trait we should all try to have as people of God. Israel's first king, Saul, is a wicked man. He turns away from faith in God and is even filled with demons at times. Saul wrongfully slaughters the priest families at Nob. He allows his paranoia to convince him that they had been conspiring with David against him. When God rejects Saul as king for his disobedience and wicked choices, he sends the prophet Samuel to anoint a shepherd boy named David as his replacement. Even as early as the killing of Goliath, David shows signs of bold faith and understanding, acknowledging that God is the true champion of Israel. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 54, he even brings the head of Goliath to parade it around Jerusalem, his future capital, while it is still under foreign control. These ambitions never lead David to cause harm towards Saul. David is patient and he trusts God's timing for when he will become king. David remains loyal to Saul and to Jonathan, who is Saul's son. Even after they both die in battle, he writes a beautiful lament for them in 2 Samuel 1. As he remains loyal to God and to Saul, he also develops into the leader God wants him to be. David is patient and trusts in God's promise. He does not take the honor of kingship too soon, even when he finds himself in a position to take matters into his own hands. He works as a musician in Saul's service, helping to restore Saul's emotional and spiritual state when a demonic spirit torments the king's mind. David eventually works his way up in military positions to earn his place as a commander. Saul, instead of being at peace, is always paranoid and on the lookout for the man God had chosen to replace him. The man Samuel called in 1 Samuel 15:28, the neighbor who is better than you. Saul is obviously a man whose identity is in his title and in his worldly position of power. When Saul sees that the hand of the Lord is upon David, and sees that both his own daughter and his son deeply love him, Saul develops evil intentions towards David. Saul knows David is the neighbor who is better than him, and he tries to kill David on several occasions. Eventually, David must flee and hide in the wilderness to avoid being killed. He is not alone for long, as he is joined by some Israelite men who are committed to him and his leadership. Twice, David has an opportunity to kill Saul and take his place as king. But in each instance, David holds back and remains loyal to Saul, honoring Saul's position as the Lord's anointed leader. His words in each of these situations tell us a lot about David's heart. While pursuing David in the wilderness of En-Gedi, Saul decides to get some rest in a cave, not realizing that David and his men are hiding in that same cave. David's men encourage violence, saying in 1 Samuel 24:4, "Behold, this is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I am about to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." This is an example of something we are all tempted to do: twist God's words to justify our own selfish desires. But David resists this temptation. All he does is cut off the hem of Saul's robe, and even that small act provokes his conscience. David says to his men in verse 6, "Far be it from me because of the Lord that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed." So they allowed Saul to leave the cave alive. When Saul's party had put some distance between them, David shouts to the king in honor, saying in verse 8, "My lord the king, and my father." Then David shows Saul the hem of his robe to prove to Saul that he means him no harm, as he had clearly spared Saul's life. David says in verse 10, "Behold, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord had given you today into my hand in the cave. And some said to kill you, but my eye had pity on you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." A similar scene takes place in 1 Samuel 26, when David sneaks with a friend into Saul's camp as Saul is sleeping. Again, David refuses to take things into his own hands. He refuses a shortcut to becoming king. Through these encounters, David proves himself to be loyal to the Lord and loyal to King Saul. If we are not careful, we will find that we are capable of justifying anything if it benefits us. This is a path we are capable of avoiding too. David avoids serving himself and instead shows his godly character. David restrains his hand and waits patiently for the Lord to make him king. He even remains patient when it appears that his failure to strike first will result in his own death at Saul's hand. Life is too complicated and uncertain to navigate without principles or some type of foundation. None of us are wise enough for the job. David's principles that are rooted in faith and obedience to God guide him wisely through unprecedented circumstances that would have led most people to harsh action. David is content to wait for God's perfect timing. He is patient to suffer as a righteous man on behalf of his love for God. As we think about this story, we might be wondering, what would have happened if David would have killed Saul to get the throne? Think of the precedent he would be setting. David's actions of killing Saul would be communicating that it's okay to kill in order to have power. This could possibly lead to his own assassination one day. To put it another way, the rash man often destroys the very thing he seeks by the way he pursues it. But a wise man is patient and pursues his desires through godly principles. David's wisdom here could fill a library. What he seems to be teaching us in his actions or lack of actions is this: be careful that in destroying monsters, you do not become a monster yourself. In 2 Samuel 23, we see David show godly character once again, this time when he is offered a drink of water. People of power often assume that they deserve special privileges and should get to enjoy these honors even if it's at the expense of others, even if it means someone's death or loss of livelihood. David shows that he will not use his power in this way. During a military campaign, he is overheard making a nostalgic remark, saying in verse 15, "Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." David's soldiers grew to love him deeply, so it's not surprising that 3 of them decide that they will fulfill this wish for David. They cut their way through enemy lines, take a skin of water from the well, and joyfully present it to David as a gift of honor. David finds himself at a crossroads. Should he drink or not? He knows the decision would speak volumes about his use of power. This water is a precious gift, since his men risked their lives to get it, and enemies were likely killed for it. The question is how to honor the gift without lifting himself above his brothers. Ultimately, David decides to pour the water out as a precious offering before the Lord. In another instance, we gain more insight into David's godly character when his pride is hurt badly by a man he meets along his way. In 1 Samuel 25, David and his men are on the run from Saul. They are careful not to cause damage or steal anything in the areas where they hide. They even guard the local sheep and shepherds. One day, David hears that a wealthy man named Nabal is out shearing his sheep. In Hebrew, Nabal means a morally corrupt fool, which is what this man proves to be. Back then, sheep shearing was a time for joy and generosity. Knowing that he and his men had been caring for this wealthy man's sheep while they were among them, David sends 10 men to him with a simple request for some food, expecting the man to be appreciative and respond kindly. Instead, the man insults David and his men and sends them away empty-handed. Nabal is too concerned about feeding his own servants to be generous to outsiders. David is furious when he hears this and decides to wipe out the household of Nabal. The wicked man's wife, a wise and beautiful woman named Abigail, hears what her husband has done and takes action to stop the coming disaster. With many gifts in hand, she intercepts David, falls at his feet, and gives a speech begging to show mercy and forgive her foolish husband. She asks him to spare the life of her family. She calls for God's blessing upon David, and she speaks confidently of the promises God has made to him. Abigail helps David realize that he should not let this prideful act be a stain on his reputation. He changes his mind and thanks her, saying in 1 Samuel 25, 32 through 33, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me, and blessed be your discernment, and blessed be you, who have kept me this day from bloodshed and from avenging myself by my own hand." As we close, let us reflect on what it means to have godly character. In all of these situations, godly character is evident when selfish human desires are overcome. Godly character is that of trust, humility, and respect. It is easy for us to justify almost any kind of behavior in order to feel better about getting what we want. But a godly person lives out godly virtues in all situations. Godliness must be on display in the way we treat strangers, in the way we manage our tempers, and in our ability to trust the Lord and wait patiently on Him. If you don't find this kind of character on display in your life, both in the little things and the big, cry out to God and ask Him to do a work in you. Ask Him to transform you into a man or woman after His own heart.